Chapter 1. Romonus Gremory. What does she ever see in that loser? That was the only thing Andrew thought as he read the light novel of high school DxD. Rahvdall Gremory, the main heroine, must have a screw loose if she fell in love with Issei of all people. Even after he read the entire series, he still felt that Issei was a weirdo, but a lucky weirdo. He tossed the novel onto his bed as he sat down in his gaming chair. It is an anime world, so logic is bound to be lost, but still. He squinted his eyes as he pondered on the universe of DxD. As long as you were not a mob, it was a wonderful place where it was all but guaranteed you would score with baddies. If you were a mob, good luck getting any women to like you, as Issei was lucky to have Dragon Riz active. He got up from his chair and looked at himself in the mirror. He smiled proudly as he looked at his trained body. Bet if I was in his case, I'd score even more. Just look at me. He flexed his muscles, and while at 17, he was 6 feet 3 inches. He wasn't in sports or anything as he hated them, but he worked out just for this reason. If I had powers, I'd bench a planet. Is that a fact? Huh. He knew damn well no one else was in the house, so hearing another voice freaked him out. Before he could even clench his fists to fight back, he was no longer in his room. Instead, he was sitting in front of a middle-aged man in a business suit. The man was reading a file on it before he looked up at him. Creepy enough, the man had yellow glowing eyes and a massive scar down the right side of his face. Welcome, young man. I am Rahvdall, the god of insanity. One of many. Andrew didn't know how to take that. You aren't going to drive me insane, are you? Rahvdall squinted his eyes and stared at Andrew. No. We lesser gods are many, and together we make these companies essentially where we reincarnate random people like you. Some get lucky when they say some keywords like you did. Andrew rubbed the back of his head as that sounded dumb. Really? That's it. Rahvdall nodded. That is it. Now then, looking over your file, you are quite an extraordinary young man. 6 feet 3 inches is above average. Your muscle definition is extraordinary and your intelligence is above average. You will do nicely. Now then, DxD. Sure. Do I get to pick the powers? Of course. You get one. What's the catch? Rahvdall smirked. Smart indeed. In exchange, when you get to your new world, make a mess of things. Change the destiny of that world as much as you can. The more changes you make, the better. That chaos caused by the breaking of fate is what a god like me feeds on. Fair. Andrew smiled. Oh, for sure. One wish? I got a request, not a wish, but I am sure you would get more chaos out of it. Rahvdall truly grinned. What is it? Make me the twin of Romonus Gremory. Just by being her twin, I am almost guaranteed to get her bloodline abilities. With that and me being in the Gremory clan, fate will begin to change, causing that chaos you feed on. Things sure are going to grow wild. Rahvdall's face turned almost Cheshire in nature as he liked the sound of that. Agreed. If anyone asks, this is my idea. Now then, what is your wish? You only get one. I want the gravity magic demon Lord Wilbert had from the better version of DxD, Testament of a Sister New Devil. Rahvdall's face began to distort, showing why he was a god of insanity. Andrew, do your worst. I am expecting great things from you, my boy. As am I. That was all he knew as he blacked out. By the time he opened his eyes, he was already being born. And it was terrible, as coming out while conscious felt like being crushed. He felt bad for Lana, but she was a devil, so she had magic to make things easier. That was a fact, as she had pain-numbing spells and healing to make this easier. When he was out, he was cleaned off with a wave of magic from the midwife, who was of course a pretty devil lady. It was hard to find an ugly female devil, as they all could change their appearance easily. The first of the twins is a boy, my lady. Then Alana looked up with a pained expression, but less than should be felt. Dear, hold him for now while I pass the second. Zeoticus nodded as he let go of her hand and took him into his hands. Meanwhile, then Alana focused on birthing her second baby, which was Rias. Andrew meanwhile looked up at Zeoticus, who looked just like in the anime. Only clean-shaven, as it seemed he grew the beard out later. The heir to the Gremory clan has been born. Romonus Gremory is your name. Romonus, that sounds awesome. I am taking it. Then Alana pushed more as she birthed Rias, who was easier than Romonus. Once Rias was out, the same attendant used magic to cut the cord and clean off the blood. It was that easy, as the birth, all things considered, had been effortless. Zeoticus passed Romonus back to his wife, who pressed him and Rias against her breasts. Boobs. Both began to drink, which made Alana smile. Twins are a rare gift. Rias has been born. They had both been allowed to name one, and Zeoticus had chosen to name his second son, of course. However, when he got a look at Romonus, he could see he had bright purple eyes like a Bale, and his hair was pitch black, just like Lord Bale's father. He was also Alana's father, and he had engaged to her. It was mildly annoying that his son looked more like the Bale clan, but Rias did have the crimson hair of the Gremory. That was to be expected when the Bale were the first devil clan created, meaning their genetics were pure. He was just happy to have twins, as devils seldom had twins. Birth rates were so low that they had not expected Alana to fall pregnant. I am over the moon, and Sirzex will be just as pleased. He now has 2 siblings. Then Alana now brought up a good point. So Romonus is the heir? Zeoticus nodded. He is the second-born and male. If Rias proves to be more talented or better at politics, she can be the heir, but until then Romonus shall be our heir. I see. Venelana was not pleased as their society usual male-dominated. With a sigh, she just enjoyed this simple time when they did not have to think of politics. How long would that last? Not long enough. After being born, Romonus of course was defenseless as any infant was. He and Rias were often breastfed by their mother, but when she couldn't attend to them, they would be breastfed by wet nurses. He was over the moon as all female devils were hotties with great bodies and breasts. By being a noble, he was fed and looked after by many. And he learned an interesting thing about devils. They had literal spells to induce lactation. That was hot as hell, and he was sure to use that in the future if and when he got his harem. Just imagining getting breastfed by Usaka or a fallen angel named Kalawarna got him going. Though, for now, he just enjoyed being a spoiled little brat seeing and sucking more boobs than most men saw. And as weird as it was, the more he was breastfed, the more energetic he felt. Then again, devils were a magical race, so for all he knew, their breast milk made their babies stronger. But the best out of everyone was still Venelana, who was a very powerful devil lady. And her boobs were huge, but while she may be his mother, he could still appreciate her breasts. Even as a devil, the first year of his life was a time of barely any activity, as even when he started walking at 7 months, he was still mostly useless. But by the time he became a year old, he began to get a feel for his demonic energy or power. He preferred to call it energy, but by simply being born a Gremory, he was born with much greater demonic energy than other devils on top of the Bale power of destruction. Those two abilities alone could allow him to become a second Surzex or greater, but he also had gravity magic to master. By being born a devil, he was already ageless up to a certain point, but he was not going to waste his formative years when one learned best. That was why he wanted to get a hold of his own magic early. Unlike him, Rias was still a regular baby, so she was just sleeping in her crib. As for him, he had gotten out of his crib and walked his unbalanced baby body to the couch. Come on, stupid head, work. Once he got to the couch, he dragged himself up and sat down. It had been a year since he was sent into this world and things had been normal. He had been like any newborn, getting his diapers changed, getting breastfed, and being played with by his new family. It was nice, but now that he could hold coherent thought for longer than a few moments without headaches, he could begin training. He had 2 active abilities to master, and 1 passive to boost them. Power of destruction and gravity. OP if done right, Rias if done wrong. He snorted as he looked in the direction of the sleeping heroine of the anime. She turned over and kept sleeping, which made him think of something. Incest was allowed among devils, but how supportive would Zeoticus be of that? Rias was a political card as she was female, and he would want to hitch her to rise her. Instead of allowing Issei to take her as his boob power-up's fate would change if he got in the middle. He grinned as he would cause the fate, or canon of this world to change. For the better or worse, who could tell? For now, he crossed his legs and sat down like a cultivator. He placed his hands on his knees and he focused. He got rid of any distracting thoughts and he just focused on himself. He imagined his demonic energy flowing through his body and manifesting it outside. Demonic energy was reliant on an open mind and imagination, which was easy for him. He was always imaginative, and it seemed to be working. Slowly, a red aura began to manifest around his body as he got a feel for his demonic energy. Once it was manifested, he got an idea and imagined it flowing through his body. The demonic energy outside his body began to shrink as instead of being pushed outside, it began to flow inside. When he did this, he felt his entire body begin to burn like a hard workout as his stagnant energy began to move. He did not know how long to keep this up, but like any work, pushing too hard would be detrimental. When he felt that burn become too bad, he released it and gasped. He was covered in sweat, and he was exhausted, but it was the good exhausted after his heavy workouts. I will be so hungry after this, but rest. He got down from the couch and walked toward his crib. As he did so, he could feel that he was using his body better than before. He was in the right direction as by 4 years old, he wanted to get a hang of it, which seemed a good time frame. Chapter 2. Interest in learning. Following Romonus unlocking his demonic energy, he made sure to keep it hidden for as long as possible. The way he could get away with it so easily was that this was a devil manor. The maids, butlers, and every servant used a form of magic every moment of the day. There were wards to prevent misuse or damage, but what Romonus was doing was the same as a household spell, so no special attention had been brought to him. At a year old, he was still being breastfed by wet nurses, but Venelana had cut the tap off. Her duties as the wife of Lord Gremory aka Zeoticus often took up a large part of her day. She made as much time as she could for them, but more often than not it was maids who attended to their needs. As for Zeoticus, he rarely if ever spent more than a few minutes with them, as being the lord of a household took up his entire time. Or, he was off king his giant harem, as a large portion of the maids in this house were in his harem. Romonus had to say the man had good taste, as all of them were big and busty. They looked radically different, but that was common. And he often got breastfed by a couple of them, which was fun. Romonus even got to see his older brother Surzex and his wife Graphia Lucifuge, which was sad. He had hoped like in some fanfics she was not his wife, but that was not the case. Sad days ahead, but Romonus was not about to betray his new brother by king his girl. However, late at night, he continued his training where he got a few on how to control his demonic energy. Rias would sleep through the night once fed, which let him do his work. In his time on Earth, he had read several stories, fanfics, and the like which had different training methods to master mana, chi, chakra, prana, and even demon magic, so after a month of simply getting a feel for how to move it in his body, he began to work on his control of it outside it. Like usual, he snuck out of his crib and sat down on the couch. He got into his favorite cultivation pose with his hands on his legs. He didn't close his eyes this time as he began to send out his demonic energy. He was trying to do the string method which he learned in a Harry Potter fanfic. The way it worked was that you would try to form your mana, or in his case demonic energy, into a string. You had to send it out further and further away while keeping the energy like a string. Harder than it sounded, as then you had to control the flow of the first one when you made a second or third, and so forth. Each consecutive stream would work your control and multitasking. Already he could send out his energy, but he was having trouble turning it into a string. Instead of a string, he looked like a big red cloud that was coming from his body. He squinted his eyes as he focused on the energy in the cloud. He pictured it condensing, solidifying, and forming a string shape which started to work. The could began to fall into itself, but after several minutes the closer he got was a rope shape with cloudy parts of it. Thanks to being born of Vinalana and Zeoticus, two very powerful devils, he was born with massive reserves. Emptying them took a while, but when they recovered it was a little bigger than before. It took him over a week before he got the trick down, and he got his demonic energy to form the string shape he wanted. But to keep it as a string he had to keep his energy flowing as he began to move it through the room. The room he and Rias shared was quite spacious, but the further he moved it the more energy it took. He still had more than enough to keep training. This is just one string, and controlling my energy perfectly is tricky. Though, this is good practice. As for Rias, she slept the night away, not aware of what he was doing. He squinted his purple eyes as a string of energy moved to the end of the room where he wrapped it around a book on the shelf. He had read each one, and they had only stories of devil kind and very little training information. The rest of it would be in the library, which he was not yet allowed in there. For now, he was stuck with this method which he did not know if it was better or worse than what the Gremory clan had. This boring way was the way he spent the big part of his night for most of his nights. Night after night he would train in controlling his energy better, and it was working. Soon he graduated to 2, then 3, 4, 5, 6, until 7. The more he made the better he got at controlling their movements, which was a great way to train in his control. Another interesting thing was that the older he got, and by mixing that with his training method, the more his power grew. Just having that was helping him a lot, as by the time he was 3 years old he had managed to move up to 20. He could form them into shapes and move them faster. If he had to say so, his reserves were massive. But that was enough for him to feel proud of his accomplishments. He kept it on the down low, as from what he saw from Rias, she was not expected to be doing anything yet. She was still a regular child who was coddled by their parents, brother, and servants. Even though he received the same care, since Rias was cuter she got more attention. He wasn't being ignored, as their father seemed to hold him in high regard. Since Surzex became Lucifer, he could not become the heir of the household. Now that he had 2 children, one being male, his heir was secured. But now that they were both 3, they had been assigned an instructor. They were taught kid stuff, how to read, write, do easy math, and some devil history. Nothing about wars, just how their race had been created and the history of the Gremory clan. That was interesting to Romonus, but Rias just wanted to goof off. It seemed even his existence was not changing her personality, but he didn't care what she was like. She may be his twin, but he was here to have fun, cause change, and do whatever the *CK he wanted. For that, he needed more power, which was why he never slacked off in his training. In his 3rd year of life, he began to add light physical exercise to his training, like running around the mansion until he was exhausted, doing small bits of calisthenics here and there, and more food. He was always hungry, as he was always using up his demonic energy and was always on the move. Now that he was up and about, he made his way to the library where he began to read up on several subjects: devil history, demonic energy control methods, rituals, magic beasts, and herbology. From what he knew, potions were a thing, but not as common as would be expected. If he could invent potions for his personal use, he could make big money to fund his future experiments. He had many, and if he wanted to cause big changes in this world, he would have to be as mighty as he could be. Currently, Zeoticus was in his office working on the paperwork of finances, political reports, and more stuff he'd rather not do. He'd much rather spend time with his harem, his wife, or his children, but work took priority. Just as he was working, the door to his office opened and one of his maids walked in. One of the fine ladies of his harem makes him feel a way to de-stress. Markina, glad to have you. She could tell what he wanted, but before that, she had to say why she was there. Before that, I thought it is prudent to inform you about your son Romonus. That snapped him out of his mood. Is he okay? He is fine, but he is in the library reading. Reading what if you know? Nursery rhymes or picture books? Markina shook her head. No, he is reading ritual books, bestiaries, herbology books, and geographical maps. That took him for a loop. Huh? Why? Is he even reading? She nodded. When I noticed him in the library, I asked myself that question. I walked over to ask him about his choice in reading, and he said he had to. I didn't press him and came to you instead. Zeoticus hummed as he touched his chin. Should I get him an instructor if he wants to learn? I thought it'd be better to wait until he was 5. Whatever you decide, sir. Zeoticus smiled. In that case, come here. She smiled as she walked over while unbuttoning her maid outfit. Of course. While Zeoticus was involved with his maid, Romonus had read through a book on controlling demonic power or energy as he called it. Pretty much, what he had been doing was the correct method and there was no secret technique. If anything, every devil had their way to make it work and his string method was working. It was not the only one he had as there were several, but it was worth it. He placed the book on the pile and opened up a book on beasts of the underworld which were numerous. Some were common, rare, extinct, or almost extinct for their unique parts. The same with magic herbs and magical metals. Every bit of information could be useful, but once he felt he read enough, he put the books back before leaving. No one bothered him about his reading for a while, but one day his father called him to his office. Wondering what he did wrong, Romonus walked into the office. Yes. Zeoticus smiled as he kneeled. Romonus, my boy, come. I wanted to ask you something. Okay. He ran over into his father's arms, who picked him up. You sure are growing heavy. Maybe you need to eat a little less. No, I will get hungry. All right, your food stays the same. Now, I wanted to ask about your reading. Do you like learning? He nodded with a smile. Ahoo. Fun. Well, would you like me to get you an instructor? They will teach you all the things you want to know. He instantly pictured someone like Gandalf, Dumbledore, or Merlin, so he nodded. Cool magic? Boom. He exaggerated his actions, making Zeoticus laugh. That too, of course. I should be able to get a good one. Just give me a week or two. Okay. He hugged his father before he ran out of the office. That made Zeoticus smile, as he was sure to get his child a good tutor. One of both teach him in magic and power. He could get the regulars or a new one. He would figure it out in time. As for Romonus, he did not return to the library and instead returned to his room. Rias was out with their mother, which would give him time to continue his training. He felt that very soon he would be able to begin to experiment with his abilities. He could not rush it, as they were destructive. Gravity, magic, and destruction both could turn lethal in the wrong hands. While he would be fine to experiment with both, it would destroy everything in his surroundings. Until he could throw black holes at people or draw down meteors from space, he would not be satisfied. Chapter 3. Instruction and Power, edited. The next 2 weeks were the same as usual for Romonus. He spent a lot of his time training in control over his demonic energy, strengthening his body, and learning in the library. He had memories of a few useful rituals he would use later on, which would give him useful abilities. Of course, when he was older, he was far from skilled enough to use any of them. But at the 2-week mark, Zeoticus called him from the library to his office. Romonus closed the ritual book he had been reading after memorizing a few useful rituals. He put the books back before he ran to his father's office. When he opened the door, Zeoticus was talking with a beautiful woman. Romonus, remember when I said I would get you an instructor? I found you a good one. Her name is Petelia Dardanius, a reincarnated devil mage. Image here. Romonus gave a polite bow to her. Hello, I am Romonus. She smiled as she kneeled to be at his eye level. You are quite polite, Romonus. As your father said, I will be in charge of your education until you are 5 years old, and I will teach you all I know, including how to use your powers. By the way, Lord Gremory, it seems his demonic power is active. How did she dash? He got his answer when he saw her eyes covered in a magic circle. She had scanned him, and she had seen that his demonic energy was not stagnant. Zeoticus turned to him. Son, have you been using your powers? Yes. It was easy. He raised his hand as he pictured his demonic energy combusting into fire. In his hand, a large flame began to burn. Petelia analyzed his level of control and found it to be very good for his age. You are quite talented at that. Lord Gremory, does the boy have his bloodline abilities? He does. Both Bale and Gremory. We tested him at birth. Has he ever used his power of destruction then? No, we told him to not use it. It is dangerous for a boy like him to use it. Petelia hummed as he turned off the fire. I can work with this. I will teach him what I know and how to use his powers, including his bloodline abilities. Is this all right? Zeoticus looked at Romonus, who had made his eyes look as cute as he could. Please, Dad. Zeoticus smiled as he relented. All right. Romonus smiled as he ran to his father, who caught him in a hug. Zeoticus turned to Petelia, who already planning what to instruct Romonus and how to train him. Will you only instruct Romonus only, or Rias as well? She turned to Zeoticus with a polite smile. You only paid for Romonus. Zeoticus cleared his voice. In that case, I can pay the same for you to instruct her. In that case, yes. But if she is slower than Romonus, you need to understand that. Of course. Petelia then turned to Romonus. Are you ready for your first lesson in magic? Yes, ma'am. Follow me then. Romonus waved goodbye to his dad as he followed the magician lady. As they were walking, she kept quiet as she was going to see how he used his magic to plan out a training regiment. He was just happy to get a proper instructor now rather than guessing his way through. Romonus, I want to ask you, what kind of devil do you want to become? He thought about it, as he always wanted to use a sword or some other weapon. A sword mage. He could use magic from up close, long range, or get in close and personal to hack and dice. I can teach you the magic aspect, but for swords, I would ask your brother's knight. Lord Surzex has the strongest peerage in the underworld after all. Cool. Petelia led him back to the library, where she asked him to sit down. First, we will talk about human magic and then devil magic. For humans, we require calculations that are based on devil magic. But devils only require imagination and control over their energy. Of course, being unimaginative will weaken your magic, so get creative. Today we will just go over what you know. Romonus nodded as he sat down in his chair, as he always did, in his cultivator pose with his hands on his legs. As he did so, from his body he began to release the energy which formed his strings again. By this point, he had 20, but the 21st was uneven. Petelia seemed quite surprised to see what he was doing, so she asked him about this. What is this? My training. I can see the merit. Each string is a line of your power, and to keep it steady takes up energy from you. You also train in multitasking and control. Who taught you this? He smiled proudly as he answered. Me. Now she looked surprised. Controlling 20 different lines of energy could not be easy, and he was making it seem effortless. When she considered his young age, it was amazing. You invented this method? He nodded with a smile. All me. She smiled as she realized her job would be easier than she expected. That makes things easier if you have your method. I have a few spells that could help with your multitasking or even your overall control. But from what I can see, you only have trained in control and not in using it. I will remedy that. Are you ready? Yes. Excellent. I will teach you when I used as a mage apprentice. Form a fire floating in front of you. He focused as his strings dissipated, but the energy in them gathered and formed a small fire. Once it was burning, she crossed her arms. Orbited around your body. Romonus did as she instructed, which was a training method in another story. As she watched how easily he did it. Add more until you begin to have trouble. He created more balls of fire which kept orbiting around him. He eventually stopped at 16 as controlling any more was becoming increasingly tricky. Seeing how well he was making them spin impressed her. Incredible control. You can stop. He snuffed out the fires as she smiled. You will certainly be a terrifying devil in the future if this is how good you are as a 3-year-old. Here's to hope your sister is just as skillful. Doubtful. Seeing his weirded out expression, Petelia realized something. She doesn't even know how to use her power, does she? He nodded, causing her to sigh. This is going to be annoying, won't it? He nodded with a chuckle. Seeing how happy he was made her smile. Well then, we got time. This was how Romonus got introduced to proper magic and information. Rias ended up getting dragged along with him, but just as Petelia had said, she was a headache. She always wanted to run off and play, she would dose off, and she did not like her head hurting, which was going to happen when using her magic. But since she was getting paid, Petelia endured the spoiled nature of noble children like Rias. Often Romonus was the opposite. As he sat still in his lectures, he did not good off, and he listened. Rias only lasted in her lessons for a month before she was excused out of lack of interest by her father. Zeoticus was disappointed, but since Rias was 3, it was to be expected. Romonus was just an outlier since he was not an actual child. But, just as Petelia had recommended, Romonus asked his older brother Surzex if his knight Suji could train him in sword fighting. Petelia only was his instructor for 2 years before she was no longer needed, as Surzex got someone better to teach him. His bishop, MacGregor Mathers, was considered one of, if not the best mage in the underworld. Petelia did not mind, as she still got paid and she felt she had gotten him ready on his path. He thanked her for her time, and he never saw her again after that. Instead, his time was consumed by Suji, who trained him in the art of the sword, Mathers in magic, and Surgersec in physical combat. The 3 servants of his older brother were always open to mentoring him, as he was open to learning everything they had to teach. He had come a long way since the early days when he was working on getting a feel for his energy, as now he had it under control. He was a different beast than when he had been born, and it showed. Romonus flipped open his journal as he sat in a fancy chair in his room. He and Rias no longer shared a room, as he had asked to have his room 5 years ago. It had been granted, and Rias rarely went into his room. His room had everything he could need, a shelf for books, and workout equipment constructed out of demonic energy. He also had a custom alchemy and chemistry set in one. He also had a weapon rack where he could place the swords that he created, like the one resting at his side. It was heavier than most longswords, but not quite a great sword. Suji had wanted him to use a katana, but he was much more partial to the heavy style of a heavier-than-normal longsword. He had made it himself out of magisteel, which he had forged from metal he had soaked in his blood, compressed with gravity, tempered in power of destruction, and forged in fire fueled by his demonic energy. Thanks to that, the sword could resist the power of destruction. Image here. Over the years, when Surtur II learned of his affinity for gravity magic, he had forced him to use it on himself, like in Dragon Ball, or the knockoff version that existed in DxD, which he could not remember the name of. It had led him to have an incredible physique for one as young as him, which had been forged by Surtur and Suji. Just as he was reading through a few rituals he had been planning on undergoing, the door to his room opened. He glanced up and saw that it was a maid. He had not learned her name, as she was just another one of his father's girls. There were hundreds of them, and each one as forgettable as the last. "What is it?" She bowed politely toward him. "Young master, today is your 11th birthday, and the madam is asking you to present yourself to the guests when they arrive." He grunted as he reached out for his sword. "She also asked you to not bring the sword and to dress in more formal attire. You are always in your battle attire, and she feels you will look better in formal wear for your birthday." His outfit. He glanced up with a squint in his eyes, which caused them to glow a deep purple. It was not a trick he had actively created, as it had started to happen when he got annoyed or angry. Mathers assumed it was because of the constant circulation and purity of his energy. At this point, by relying on his bloodline and extreme training, he had already entered the ultimate class. Being the son of Rahvdall, Romonus Gremory, and his stronger soul thanks to being a reincarnator, he grew his power quickly. Of course, he was going through the same issue that Rias went through in Canon, as everyone said it was because of his clan, his brother, or his parents. He ignored such statements as they were just that. Statements. "All right, you can go." This maid had just been added to the harem half a year ago for her great body, but it was worthless to him. Her power was less than even a low-class devil, as she was just a commoner devil who was lucky to be pretty. Of course, she ran out of the room in fear, as Romonus over the years had become very proud of his power. He disliked those who did not improve themselves and relied on others. Like the maid who ran out as she got some status by sucking off his father now and then. Honestly, Dad is a lucky guy. Hundreds of women are all for him, and no one can tell him that is wrong. Then again, he is effectively a king as a clan lord. Can't be me, though. If and when he got his harem, he did not want a bunch of weaklings. He wanted women to have some significance instead of dime a dozen maids like his father's. Sure, they were hot, but he was sure if he asked they would *CK him in a heartbeat. They were after status, not love. While he was after power. He had not forgotten why he was here. He was here to change the canon and make a nuisance of himself. He had 7 more years until he was 18 when the canon started. He felt he had prepared enough, and it was time for him to begin to cause the chaos he had promised. He grabbed his sword and placed it into his spatial ring. He was going to not bring it this time around for his mother's sake. He waved his hands and instantly removed his outfit, which he placed onto a mannequin to hold it. He then placed a hand on his chest, and dense demonic energy began to flow over his body, which he quickly formed into a fancy suit. Image here. He modeled it after John Wick's suit, as it was a classic and one he quite liked. He quickly looked himself in the mirror and smiled, as he had become a good-looking guy. Sure, he was only 11, but the next 4 years were changing him greatly. Chapter 4. Rias and Romonus Heart-to-Heart, edited. One of the best uses of demonic energy, in his opinion, was that they could change their appearances on whims. His mother, Rahvdall, actively made herself look to be in her early 20s. His uncle Lord Bale kept his appearance to be in his middle ages. His grandfather for some reason made himself look old, while the only thing he used it for was to remove his childlike features, which made him look more mature than his actual age. He was not tall, but certainly tall for his age, as he was 5 feet 5 inches. Since today was his 11th birthday, he was certainly a tall kid. Here's to hoping we have a normal day. Romonus walked out of his room, which he locked with a key. He hated people going anyone in his room, which was why it was usually locked. The new maid didn't know this fact, but she had found him in a good mood. Regardless, he placed his hands at his side and began to walk toward the ballroom where everything was going to take place. As he walked through the halls of the manor, he sometimes passed servants, maids, butlers, and the like who would bow to him. They also gave him the room he desired. He was not known for his friendly demeanor, but he was respectful to them when they did speak to him. This was a subject of disagreement between Zeoticus and Rahvdall. Zeoticus felt it was a great mentality for a future lord, while Rahvdall didn't think being closed off like him was healthy. Rias, on the other hand, was a subject of scrutiny because of him. He showed off his talent quite openly, and several marriage proposals were sent his way because of his power. Even his uncle, Lord Bale, and grandfather Demonidas Bale placed their backing with him. For one, he took after their clan almost exclusively without a hint of Gremory crimson in his hair. His proud temperament was written off as the Bale blood running strong in his veins. As for Rias, she seldom if ever trained like him. That was the scrutiny, as he had never slacked off, which led to his power exceeding what a devil his age would have. Meanwhile, Rias was childish, so she was treated like most females. A bargaining chip, while he was seen as an extraordinary heir. Two twins who were as different as the sea and sky. Romonus eventually made his way into the massive ballroom, which was being used for the birthday celebration. His parents had gone all out as he and Rias were entering their teenage years. They had invited as many of the pillars who were all going to be coming. This was also going to be used to assess Rias and his worth as a marriage candidate. He of course would crush any attempt to force him to marry, but Rias was another story. He of course planned to help as she was his sister, and he wanted her when she got older. For 4 reasons. First of all, it would F***CK with Riser. Second, it would F***CK with Issei. Third, it would F***CK up Canon. Fourth, she was going to be a hottie, and while she may be his sister, she wasn't his sibling in his mind. When he entered the ballroom, all eyes went to him as they were still getting ready. Today was the birthday, and they were finishing things for when the guest arrived. Then Alana was organizing a few final details, but when she saw the way he was dressed, she got happy. Romonus, look at you, my handsome boy. She walked over to him and hugged him, causing his face to be pressed into her cleavage. Still great. Well, this is a ball, so I felt I should dress to impress. Still, is it too fancy? She shook her head as she let him go. No, it's perfect. It will stand out among the traditional clothes of devil nobility. Zeoticus, what do you think? Zeoticus looked his son over before he walked over. He smiled proudly as he placed a hand on Romonus' shoulder. You're growing into an incredible young man, son. Romonus smiled as he truly loved his parents. Thank you. Here's to another birthday. Zeoticus smiled with a curious smile. Yes, we have a surprise for you later, my son, but you will have to wait. Romonus was now curious, but he did not ask. All right. Zeoticus at moments like this thought back to when the knight, mage, and rook of Sursex agreed to train Romonus. He was overjoyed. It had honed Romonus into a powerful young man, but it came at a cost. He had become cold and distant, with a pride that burned hot. His maids had more than once come to him saying they were terrified of Romonus, though he was a respectful young man when it came to his family. Enjoy yourself, son. Romonus bowed once before he turned around and walked off. He seldom spoke at these events, not because he was shy, but because most nobles had terrible personalities. He hated those slimy pricks, so he disliked events like this like the plague. If he had his way, his birthday would be spent with a big family-only feast. But when one was a noble, that luxury was lost on them. Instead, he sat down at a random table where he closed his eyes to pass the time. Despite being seated and seemingly doing nothing, he was in reality training. He was circulating his massive demonic energy reserve through his entire body, including his muscles, bones, circulatory system, and nervous system. Just by doing this, his body improved much faster, and he at least hoped his bloodline became pure. He did not know if this was true, as while he was starting to focus on human science, it wasn't exactly easy to learn of an artificial race like devils. While he distracted himself, Rias was currently in her room bubbling away as several maids got her ready for her party. I can't wait. One of the maids smiled as she worked on Rias' dress. You will look breathtaking, my lady. If only your brother would let us near him to dress him up. He always dresses himself. Rias stopped smiling when she heard that. She was always being compared to her 2 brothers, Sursex and Romonus. It wasn't always good things said, as on their 10th birthday her grandfather, Demonidas, told her she was embarrassing the Bale clan with her open weakness. She had just been having a good time when he had told her that, ruining the night. When she told her motor later that night, Venelana had been angry but had not said anything to her father. Instead, Rias had been told that Demonidas was stuck in his ways and to ignore what he said. Rias' parents had worked hard to let her have a normal childhood. As normal as it could be as a noble lady of the Gremory clan. Only now that she was 11 was she beginning to understand what it meant to be a noble. Already, she was getting swarmed with marriage proposals. She had wanted nothing to do with them, as she had wanted to end up falling in love and marrying who she chose. Her brother Romonus told her that she was delusional if she thought that she had that right. It was a privilege that she would have to earn, and she could have if she trained with him. She had joined him on one of his training sessions on a much easier schedule and quit. She couldn't handle Suji, Searcher, and Mathers all pushing her the way they did. Being spoiled all her life, she could barely endure their heartless training. Even worse was when she saw Romonus training, which disheartened her. She could never catch up to him or her older brother Sursex. The day Romonus entered the ultimate class, the whole family celebrated. Even her brother Sursex said that Romonus was on his way to surpass him. Without realizing that, it put more pressure on Rias, who started to feel inadequate. She had pulled away instead of doing what she needed. She ran away into delusion. Am I an embarrassment? Okay, your dress is ready. Her maid smiled as she looked Rias over. You will make a lovely bride one day, my lady. Hearing those words filled her with a sense of dread. Bride? What do you mean? The maid tilted her head confused. You don't know? Today, your father will decide your groom to be. That is why all of the lords of the pillars will be in attendance. Today, it shall be known who you will marry. Isn't that wonderful? Ria's face pulled back in horror, but the maid just walked to the door to open it. Come along. Your family must be waiting. Rias did not talk as she was led to the ballroom. Her mind was still stuck on the news she had heard that she would be assigned a groom. She couldn't help but think back to her brother Romonus' words. Marriage for nobles are all arranged, and if you don't want the same, you better be strong enough to enforce your will. He is right. When she entered the ballroom, she saw her mother and father smiling in her direction. She also saw Romonus sitting at a table with his eyes closed. He opened them as soon as Rias entered the room. He stood up and walked toward her. Leave. I need to speak to my sister. The maids bowed at his words. Of course, sir. The maids gave them distance and went to help with the final setups. Once they were alone, Romonus crossed his arms as he could see it in her face she knew. The maids let it slip, didn't they? Rias gripped her dress as she looked at the ground. You knew. He nodded. It was going to happen. I tried to warn you many times, and I even tried to get you to get stronger to avoid this. You are lucky you won't be married until you turn 18, giving you 7 years. You have 7 years left from the start of your engagement to grow as strong as possible to get out of it. Rias looked up with hope in her eyes. I get 7 years? Thanks to me and our brother. If it were up to the nobles, you would be married off in 4. Would you rather be married then? Because I can tell them to move it up. She shook her head with happiness in her eyes. Brother, I won't slack off anymore. I won't cry. I will do anything you tell me. Help me get stronger. Romonus was not so sure about that. Are you sure you are not going to quit? The last time I managed to get you to train, you were crying after 30 minutes, and by the hour you were done. And then again, your marriage is your fault after all. He looked up with crossed arms as he feigned being uninterested. Rias ran forward and grabbed his suit. She looked up at him with her blue eyes teary. I promise I won't quit. I will do anything. He looked down at her and smiled before placing a hand on her head. All right. Because I will be damned if I have to watch you be married off like that. You have too much talent to be allowed to just be married to some random noble cunt like that. Rias finally started to see the truth in what her brother had been telling her. She had just been too blind to notice. Romonus did not realize that this simple change in mentality in Rias had sent fate into a mad spiral because she was the main heroine of the chosen one of the world. Such a simple thing already caused the fate of the world to change in such a way. Rahvdall was already starting to feed on the chaos. Romonus' boss was quite pleased as things were starting to pick up pace. Issei's destined one was already leaving him, and the changes that would occur as a result would be all encompassing. And Romonus was all for it. Chapter 5. Birthday Gift. Edited. Romonus is quite close with his Baal relatives. Romonus smiled as he had a soft spot for Rias, at least the one who was his sister. She was family, and despite his less than pure love for her, he truly cared. Now that she was going to begin to train, he could begin to grow their relationship past just siblings. However, it would have to wait as he walked Rias over to their parents. She was still holding his arm now as he would be the one to present her. Zeoticus and Vinalana smiled when they saw both of their children. Rias looked especially adorable in her crimson dress, while Romonus in his suit looked dashing. Rias let go of his arm as she rushed to hug their parents. Zeoticus reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. Everything should be ready. Now we just wait for our guest. Romonus nodded as he got ready to once again face the politics of his new life. Until then, he spent the time talking with Rias about how he was going to help her train. Of course, nice and easy because he was not lying to himself that she was weak-willed. About 45 minutes later, as he was leaning on a wall with Rias, was when their older brother Surzex arrived. He had come with Grafia, but she had not come as his maid, but rather as his wife. With them, they had their son Milikas, who was 3 years old. Seeing his oldest son arrive, Zeoticus walked over with a smile. Surzex, it is wonderful to see you. You are so busy with work these days. Surzex chuckled as he shook his father's hand. Well, being the Devil King has its cons. I have been wanting to quit, you know. Grafia frowned as he often said this. Surzex, please think of your status and what that would mean before you make any decisions like this. He laughed a bit more. Come on, Grafia. I would have more time for Milikas that way, and who could forget my siblings? Rias had already run from Romonus' side. Brother. She jumped into Surzek's arms as he hugged her tightly. Rias, you are as adorable as always. Thank you. As Surzex was spoiling Rias, Romonus grinned as he pulled his sword out of his spatial ring. His demonic energy surged through his body, especially his legs, as he charged forward. He used the technique taught to him by Suji, Godspeed. Of course, he was much slower than his teacher, but he was insanely quick. Surzex, though, smiled as he tilted his head a little and dodged his swing. He let go of Rias as he turned to his younger brother. Romonus, I am hurt. Romonus smiled at his brother. Save it. You're a super devil. A little cut from a twig such as this would be fine. Now hold still. He charged back and began to slice and dice with his blade, which Venelana wanted to stop. Zeoticus raised a hand as this happened every time. Surzex, without boosting his capabilities with demonic energy, avoided every swing with ease. Romonus squinted his eyes as he drew his gravity magic to reduce the effect of gravity on him. His speed practically doubled as he leapt in the air and swung down with both arms. Surzex, without missing a beat, raised his hands and caught the blade with his hand, stopping Romonus in his tracks. Romonus grit his teeth as he pulled with all his might, but his sword would not budge. Damn it all. Surzex laughed as he let go of the sword. You have grown stronger since the last time we sparred. Keep it up, and the day will come when you will defeat me. Romonus smiled at the encouraging words. Count on it, because your throne will be mine one day. I will be the next Lucifer. Romonus pulled his sword back and placed it back in his spatial ring. He had made it his goal to be able to defeat Surzex, as he was using him as a placeholder for Rahvdall. If he could beat his brother, Surzex, he could beat the slimy prick of Rahvdall. Hearing his words made Surzex smile. He placed a hand on his shoulder. You can do anything you put your mind to, Romonus. You have the drive and dedication to achieve your dreams. If you aim to grow strong enough to defeat me, I know you will achieve your dream. Of course, I won't make it easy for you. Romonus laughed as he hugged Surzex. Thanks for the pep talk. Rhea smiled as she heard what Surzex told Romonus. What about me? If I train hard, will I become strong enough? Surzex began to think about it before he ruffled her hair. Of course. All you need to do is put your mind to it and work for it. Right, Grafia? Grafia nodded. I can see it happening, considering you have begun to slack these days. How does it feel that an 11-year-old has more drive than you? Ouch, Grafia. Cutting a little deep there, don't you think? No. Hold Millie ass for me, won't you? She handed Millie ass over to her husband before she stepped over to Romonus. She reached out and pulled on his cheeks. With her Satan-class strength, it even hurt him despite his power. Oh. When she let go, she had a smirk on her face. That's what you get for attacking my husband. He rubbed his cheeks as he called her out on it. You do it all the time unprovoked. That's different. Different? Because you're old. With a frown, Grafia bonked him on the head, leaving his mind rattled. She walked off with a huff as he was left to rub his head. Brother, your wife is crazy. Surzex chuckled nervously as he could feel her glaring at him. You think so? I do. Romonus shrugged and walked off. Once Surzex arrived, the other guests began to arrive one after the other. The Gremory Manor was massive, and the ballroom where the party was being held was just as big. Romonus began to observe as lords and ladies from the clans began to gather. He counted off the clans he saw, as there were 32 that still existed out of the 72. They ranged from Lord Bale, his wife, and his son Madragon Bale. Sarord was still exiled and never brought to these gatherings. Lord Agiras, and his daughter Sikvera Agars. There were many more, but he only recognized a few from the story. He even saw that slimy prick Diodora, who had his signature smile on his face. Just seeing it made Romonus interested in ripping his heart out. Using it as an ingredient in a ritual would be a good use of such a rotten thing. He was not using it. Hold on, let's think this carefully. Ajuka Beelzebub is his direct relative, and anything I do can be tracked. I can at least get something to use against him. Time to play this cool. Romonus got off his wall and walked over to Diodora, who was with his father and mother. Lord Astaroth turned to him and gave him a polite nod of the head. Romonus, happy birthday. Romonus smiled at the relative of Ajuka. Lord Astaroth, I hope you and your wife have a fun time. I bet it is dull to be at a birthday party. Lord Astaroth shook his head. Not at all. We are glad to be here. Romonus brought up his point. If you don't mind, I would like to speak to Diodora, if you don't mind. Diodora kept his smile as he quickly agreed. Of course. Speaking with the next Gremory heir would be an excellent use of my time. Lord Astaroth smiled as he watched his son walk off with Romonus. He only needed a hair of Diodora to use, as his teacher Mather had taught him many types of magic. Most of them were lethal, but he would need the aid of his teacher for this. As the both of them stopped, Romonus turned to Diodora. So, you like nuns? Diodora's eyes shot open. What? You like nuns? Your peerage consists of them, doesn't it? I know what you do. With squinted eyes, the young devil dismissed the fact. No. You must be mistaken. Is that so? Because I could swear that every single one of your peerage consists of excommunicated nuns and maidens. What would the church think? Are you threatening me? No. You have good taste. I just wanted to say that you should be more careful, as the church might get wind of your plans. If that happened, the angels might get mad. So, keep that in mind. I will. If you will excuse me. As Diodora walked back to his parents, Romonus with some telekinesis ripped a hair from his head. Diodora barely noticed, as he felt it was just an itch. Once he was back with his parents, he made up a lie about what they talked about. As for Romonus, his face did not change as he walked back to his wall. He stored Diodora's hair away, which he would use in a ritual to claim Diodora's heart. The ritual he wanted to use required the heart of a magical creature and a few other materials. The ritual was spoken in off by McGregor, and how if used properly would purify a magician energy. In his case, he hoped to use the demonic energy held by a pure-blooded devil to increase the purity of his own. Plus, Mathers had already used it before, and he said it had no downsides. Of course, he could not rush anything as Ajuka was a nightmare. He would need Max Gregor's help for his plan to work. For now, he began to look around as there were several hundred people there. Besides Surzex, the other Satans had also arrived. Falbium Asmodeus was straight up asleep in a corner. Seraphal was making a ruckus off an earshot, while Ajuka was keeping to himself. But with a glance, he was able to spot Riser, who was around 15 years old. All things considered, Riser was not all that bad compared to Diodora. Sure, the dude was a horn dog, but was that so wrong? He was a noble devil, so of course he wanted hot girls for his harem. And he had them from what the anime showed. The only thing he was doing wrong was gunning for Rias. Romonus took a deep breath as had other people to speak to. For one, he made his way to his uncle Lord Bale. When his uncle spotted him, a rare smile appeared on the man's face. "Nephew, so good to see you." With a polite bow, Romonus returned the gesture. "The same could be said about you, uncle. You seem to be in good health. A shame grandfather could not be here. My father was quite busy, but he did tell me to bring you a birthday gift from our treasury." Romonus had not expected that. Grandfather did? Lord Bale nodded as pulled something out of his spatial ring. When Romonus saw what he had in hand, his eyes almost fell out of their sockets how shocked he was. A demon sword. Lord Bale grinned when he saw the look of reverence on Romonus' face. "Exactly. My father spoke to our ancestor Zekrom Bale, who had this blade stored away in our treasury. It was forged during the Great War, and it has tasted much angel blood during that time. Its name is Blooddrinker, named as such because it was forged from the soul and body of a vampire noble who wronged the Bale clan. Now, it is time for this sword to have a new wielder. Despite being born of the Gremory, you exemplify all a Bale should be. Make us proud, my boy." "I will, uncle. I shall not forget this." Image here. He held both hands out as Lord Bale placed the sword in his hands. Once he had it in hand, he pulled out the sword from the sheath and could swear the face crafted below the handle was screaming in pain. He could feel the demonic energy bubbling away and the sword hungering for blood. "You shall get your due." He placed the sword in his spatial ring as well. He had to be careful, overusing a demon sword could kill you. As he was thinking this, then Alana saw him speaking with her brother. She had seen what Romonus had been gifted to. She rushed over. "Brother, why did you give him a demon sword?" "It's his birthday gift. Our father spoke to the ancestor who agreed to pass it on Romonus. He has shown much talent in the art, and demon swords should be wielded by pure blood after all. But the danger, it could kill him. That is a risk, but Romonus knows what he is doing. He isn't a child anymore." Romonus nodded. "I know the risks, but also the reward. I shall not be led astray." Then Alana was still worried, but at that moment Zeoticus spoke up with a spell to boost his volume. "Welcome all to the birthday of my children Romonus and Romonus Gremory. This will also be an announcement, as through the years I have received many marriage proposals for both my son and daughter. After a long discussion, I have found the best candidates both." Instantly all attention was drawn to Zeoticus, who was about to announce the agreed-upon marriage proposals. Romonus had not expected to be included in such a thing, but depending on who it was he would agree or fight it to his last breath. Which one it was would have to be seen. Chapter 6, New Fiancé. Before announcing it, Zeoticus wanted his children at his side. He turned to Rias and Romonus to call them forward. "Romonus, Rias, come up." Romonus took a deep breath as he walked toward his father, while Rias did the same. If this had been before Romonus talked with her, she would have caused a scene, but she was not scared. She had time to get ready to break her engagement. She looked toward Romonus, who looked in her direction with a smile. It was a smile that said 1,000 words, so she did not panic. It was time for her to take charge of her fate, all because of her brother's encouraging words. When both of them were with their father, they instantly became the center of the room. With a glance, Romonus could see several lords who had their daughters, nieces, granddaughters, or even younger siblings whom they had suggested to Zeoticus. Marriage in Devil Society was all about forging connections and alliances. Whoever was accepted would be tied to the Gremory clan, which held the rank of Duke. High up in the rankings of the remaining clans. It has been 11 years since the blessing that was the birth of my twins, Rias and Romonus Gremory. During that time, I have received many requests from many of the pillars to tie our clans together. Now, my wife and I have come to a decision. Thanks to Lord Beelzebub and my son Lord Lucifer's recommendation, it has been decided that the Astaroth and Gremory households shall be linked in blood. It is my pleasure to announce the engagement of Latia Astaroth and my son." Surzex smiled as he gave a thumbs up to Ajuka. The green-haired man returned the gesture as he allowed a rare smile to appear on his face. Both of them were great friends, brothers even, and now they would be tied together. Instantly, a wave of applause was formed as Romonus and Latia looked at each other. Latia was from a branch family born of the union of the Astaroth and Aegirus clans. Romonus smiled in her direction, placed a hand over his heart, and gave a light bow. She returned the gesture with a curtsy by holding the sides of her crimson dress. Romonus was for sure not going to fight the engagement, as she was a wonderful person. She would make a wonderful bride, and he would try to be the best husband he could. Thankfully, he would still be allowed to have his harem as noble devils always did. Though legally, Latia would be his legal wife, which he had no complaints about. Once the applause settled down a little, Zeoticus turned to Rias. Now, my daughter Rias has had many suitors, all of which would link our clans together as well. It has been decided that my daughter Rias Gremory shall be engaged to Riser Phoenix. May they both have happy marriages. Riser grinned as he winked in Rias' direction. However, she snorted and looked away. She did it openly, which made Riser snarl in displeasure. People started to look in his direction as Rias seemed heavily uninterested in him. Zeoticus cleared his throat as he tried to clear the air. Enjoy the rest of the celebration. Rias, Romonus, take this time to get to know your future spouses. Rias and Romonus bowed to their father, but as they began to walk, Romonus bent down to speak to Rias. Don't let him touch you. Don't let him rile you up. And keep deflecting. You have 7 years. I will make sure he can never lay a finger on you. All you have to do is trust me. Do you? Rias nodded with a determined look on her face. I trust you. From there, they both split up as Romonus walked to Latia. At the moment, she was the same age as him, but he was taller than she was by a few inches. When he reached her, he bowed once again. Lady Astaroth, I am Romonus. I wish to spend the rest of the evening by your side. Latia extended a hand to him. As do I, Lord Gremory, but if we are to be engaged, let's not refer to each other by honorifics. You can call me Latia, and I shall call you Romonus. He smiled as he took her hand, which was extremely soft. As he did so, he looked at her nails, which were painted a light blue, and even the tips of her blonde hair were dyed blue as well. He smiled as he planted a polite kiss on the back of her hand. If that is what you want. Before we go any further, I wanted to ask what you feel about this engagement. It is expected for nobles such as us to be married off, and you seem to have the power to fight your engagement. Quite easily, may I add. Latia was no slouch, as Ajuka himself had been mentoring her as she was his niece since she was a small girl. As a result, her strength was many times higher than would be expected of her age. It exceeded many of the older nobles who never trained at that too. Not yet the ultimate class like him, though. She smiled when she heard his words. I see you are perceptive. He smiled back. I was mentored by the best knight, rook, and bishop of the underworld. And you were mentored by Ajuka Beelzebub, so we are even. Latia explained why she was not fighting her engagement. I am not a fool, Romonus. I have heard many rumors about you, and for the past few years, my uncle began to bring up the idea of a marriage between us. He never forced the issue, but your brother Serzex and my uncle have been talking about being family for years. If my uncle was married and had a daughter, he would engage them to Milikas. But he is uninterested in such a thing, so his niece, was chosen. Does that displease you? Romonus shook his head. I was planning on fighting my engagement with all my heart if it had been to someone else. As you know, devils are not commonly known to train themselves, and I have been training since I was 3. I have earned my power, and I did not wish to be engaged to a spoiled noble brat who relied on her status for everything. I think that is the exact reason we were chosen for each other, as you seem to have the same desire. I do. For many years my uncle has mentored me, so I desired a groom to at least match my drive. And I have found them, it seems. I am pleased to have passed your scrutiny. The dance will begin soon. Will you be joining me? She smiled as she stood next to him and held his arm. I shall. Until then, I have a simple question. What is your hobby? Because of my mentor McGregor Mathers, I have cultivated an interest in experimenting with new magic types, and I have recently begun to learn alchemy. It is my wish to one day be able to never before see elixirs, but it is still just a hobby. That sounds interesting. Maybe I can help you with your studies. As for me, because of my mixed heritage, I am close to my relative Sikvera Agars. Because of her, I have an interest in sci-fi. Anime. That seemed to have made her perk up a lot. You know of anime? He nodded. Of course. I am quite a fan of anime myself. I have developed a few spells from anime I have seen in the past. Do you have any mecha anime recommendations? I certainly do. I am quite glad you enjoy anime like I do. While Romonus and his new fiancée Latia got to know each other, Rias was with Riser. She had her arms crossed as she looked at the 15-year-old blonde. Rias Gremory, word of you has most certainly spread. Your beauty shall only rise with age, as I am sure to see once we are wed. Don't count on it. Riser's eye twitched. Huh? Don't count on what? Me marrying you. I have made up my mind to challenge our marriage. A good day to you. With that, she walked off, leaving Riser slack-jawed. His father, Lord Phoenix, barely held back a chuckle. His wife elbowed him in the side as Riser was already starting to get mad. How dare she? His older brother Rahvdall broke the silence. I am happy for her. Being married to you would suck. Rahvdall. His mother tried to chastise him, but he did not relent. Am I wrong, though? Riser is not known for his respectful attitude, and neither Sursex nor Romonus approve of him. Just look. Riser looked in Surzek's direction, who smiled in his direction with a kind, but teasing look. He then looked over at Romonus, who turned to him with a smirk. Seeing not just the Devil King, but the next Gremory heir disapprove left him pissed. When is the marriage? Lord Phoenix answered. When Rias reaches the age of 18. Riser grit his teeth and clenches his hands tightly. They're giving her time to break it off? Do they know who I am? Rahvdall nodded. Which is why they are doing this. They know exactly who you are. Now suck it up. As he had his crisis, Rias with a smile on her face walked over to her mother's side. Then Alana reached down and held her hand, as she was happy her daughter had a chance to choose for herself. She had time to grow stronger, master herself, and had a chance to choose for herself. She thought back to her childhood, as she was the daughter of Dimonitas Bale's mistress. Despite inheriting the clan power of destruction and being the strongest woman ever born of Clan Bale, she was still not able to become the next heir. With her power, she could have fought her engagement at any time, but when she learned she would be marrying Zeoticus, she did not. The Gremory clan were all kind, lovable people, and very quickly she had fallen in love with her husband. She had been lucky, but Rias did not have that luck with Riser, so she would have to fight for it. How are you feeling, Rias? I was scared before, but not anymore. Romonus promised to help me. Did he? Are you even going to be able to endure the training regiment? Rias blushed, as it was true she had quite the last time. Let's not talk about last time. New time, new me. Then Alana smiled as she looked at Romonus chatting away with Latia. From the smiles, laughs, and good interaction they were having, she was truly happy for the both of them. I wish them a happy marriage. Meanwhile, Sursex and Ajuka were both watching their relatives in the distance. Sursex patted Ajuka on the shoulder. I am sure Romonus will make her happy. He better, she is the closest thing I have to a child of my own. Rahvdall chimed in with the most obvious. Then get married, Jukakuin. Ajuka denied that. I am good. Falbium opened his eyes as he had been sleepwalking. Marriage means no more naps, so I don't blame you. Ajuka agreed with some of what Falbium said. That, and I don't have the time. I have other things to do. My duties as Beelzebub and my hobbies take priority. A wife would take that from me. Rahvdall had to agree. True. We are busy as it is, and being married would steal the little freedom I have. Sursex smiled. How about Romonus? Rahvdall laughed and waved him off. He's like a little brother to me. Besides, Rias and Sona are close friends. Me getting involved with him would just be weird. Sursex shrugged. Just saying. The four of us are all reaching our 6th century in a few more decades. It would be nice to not be the only married Satan. Ajuka, Rahvdall, and Falbium all looked at each other before they all laughed. Ajuka patted Sursex on the shoulder with pity. Just seeing you married is enough to make me appreciate being single. You be the outlier for us. Rahvdall giggled as she gave him a thumbs up. Agreed. Good luck with that. Falbium closed his eyes and fell back asleep. Sursex frowned as he looked at Romonus and communicated telepathically. Yo, Romonus. I got a mission for you. Romonus turned to his brother. What is it? Marry Rahvdall. Huh. You heard me. Add her to your harem or whatever. Do it for your brother. Romonus got serious and gave his brother a thumbs up. Sursex returned the gesture with a smirk on his face. Graphia, who was watching the whole interaction, sighed as her husband was up to no good again. Either way, Romonus was fine with getting closer to Rahvdall. She was a hottie and fun to be around. Chaotic girls were fun, and since she was forever single, she was a virgin. All the better. Chapter 7. A Dance to Remember. After Sursex essentially told him to seduce his friend, Romonus was in no way opposed. Rahvdall was a fan favorite of his because not only was she a goofball, she had the power to back it up. He had 3 criteria for the ladies that would form his harem one day. Of course, beauty was the first, second was drive to improve, third of all was fun, and the chaotic 4th option was to cause as much of a shitstorm to fate as possible. Rahvdall was single in the series and was only friendly to Issei. As for the fate of Issei himself, Romonus could simply murder him to take the boosted gear or handle him some other way. Issei was the main character of DxD, so killing would not be easy. Plot armor would activate or something of that nature. Instead, he planned to allow Rainier to nearly kill him and then come in at the final moment to deal the final blow. It was easily achievable as he could already end a large city at maximum power. Of course, Kuo was important, but he would not spend his time in the town. He was brought out of his thoughts when Latia spoke to him. I wanted to ask you this, but I saw you talking with Diodora earlier. What did you say to him? Since he is the heir of the Astaroth family, I felt it prudent to get along with him since he is related to Ajuka, my brother's best friend. I suggested that we bring our clans closer. Turns out, it was unneeded, as that is why we are being engaged. Latia understood, as that was a perfect reason to talk to him. Were you uninformed of this decision? I was uninformed. I had assumed my father would engage Rias, but not me. Turns out he decided to go ahead with it, and it seems that we both won out in the end. Latia hugged his arm a bit tighter, as since she was a child she had been told it was her duty to marry a fellow noble. Her uncle had told her that the best way for her to take ownership of her fate was to grow strong enough to be able to accept or deny it. In her case, Romonus just happened to be what she was looking for. We should speak to my uncle before he goes off into his lab. We won't be wed until we are both 18, which leaves us 7 years to nurture a relationship. Said it will have to be long distance. Does it have to be? I can visit you as often as you desire and vice versa. I would like that, but we both are going to be busy in our time. Puberty is when we devils undergo the most growth, so my time will be spent in training. My uncle even has thought of passing along his method to me. Romonus understood her. I get it. I will also begin to train not just under my brother's peerage, but under him as well. Now, let's talk to them. I want to get a reaction out of Beelzebub. As they both began to walk toward the Satans, Latia turned to him. That will be hard. He rarely if ever smiles and keeps to himself. Only because I am the daughter of his brother did he ever give me that much attention. I have heard that about him. A shame that one of the super devils of our race has no interest in the opposite gender. Very true. When they finally reached the Satans, the 4 of them turned toward them. Serzex placed a hand on Romonus' shoulder. Congratulations, Romonus. I feel happy for you. Romonus genuinely smiled this time. Thank you, brother. You all should have informed me beforehand. Anyway, I wanted to talk to my uncle-in-law. Can I call you uncle? Ajuka nodded. Call me whatever you want. I wanted to inform you that you will be receiving your evil pieces in a month. After that, you will be free to begin to explore the human world all you want. Romonus had several locations in the world where he could find good candidates for his peerage. Thank you. I was getting cooped up being in the underworld because of the politics. It might be fun. Rahvdall began to laugh after hearing his words. In that case, are you sure you want to become the next Lucifer? It's full of paperwork and boring meetings. Can I just use a computer to do all that for me? Don't tell me you actually do paperwork by hand. Instantly, Rahvdall and Serzex looked at each other. They had not thought about it before, which made Falbium shake his head. Why do you think I have so much time to sleep? My computer does most of my work for me. Ajuka shrugged. Same. Seeing how he had just dropped a bomb on his brother and Rahvdall, Romonus sighed. Honestly, brother, I thought you would know that. Serzex waved him off. I am almost 600 years old. Lay off already. Rahvdall pointed at herself. Do I look like someone good with technology? Romonus looked down to look at her as she was short. He started to hold back a laugh as she was only 5 feet 2 inches. He was 11 and was already taller than she was. When she noticed, she frowned. You are making fun of me, aren't you? No, not at all. I don't believe you. Latia began to chuckle as her uncle and his friends were just a bunch of goofballs with enough power to rule their society. They were just good people who had no interest in world domination or something as dumb. Ajuka turned to Romonus with a smile. Make my niece happy. Romonus decided to try to play his family card here. Then can you teach me the Kankara formula? Ajuka did not straight up say no as he expected. How good are you at math? Romonus in his past life was a straight-A student, but math was such a hard subject. Above average. Ajuka pondered on it. I will be teaching Latia here, so if you come along I can test to see how compatible you are with it. Consider it a gift for joining our families as one. Thank you. I will not forget to return the favor. Ajuka smiled and ruffled his hair. Just keep being the same, and don't go wanting world domination. Romonus had no interest in that. Ruling the world is dumb. I much rather spend the time on my hobby. Just as Ajuka was going to ask what it was, Zeoticus spoke once more. Now that my children have had the chance to speak to their future spouses, I think it is time to wrap up this celebration with a dance. Romonus turned to Latia as it was a good chance to show off his dance skills. He had been taught dancing by his mother, and he had taken a fancy to it thanks aiding his footwork. Would you honor me with a dance? Of course. They were not the only young couple, as many nobles had been engaged much younger than them and already either close to their finances or growing closer to them. Some adults decided to dance like Lord Citri and his wife Lady Citri, but Lord Bale did not. His uncle was a cold and reserved man, so his wife instead stood by his side in silence. Regardless, he ignored all other distractions and instead focused on Latia. Are you familiar with tango? Of course. Romonus wrapped a hand around her waist while she placed her hands in his. From there, they both got rid of all distractions and began the dance of tango. This was the first time they had met, and a dance like this was a very intimate moment. The both of them started slow, but quickly they began to find their rhythm. Latia and Romonus quickly started to become the center of the room as their dance began to pick up pace. Latia's mother openly wept at her daughter's dance while her father looked over to Ajuka with a smile. Ajuka looked back at his brother and smiled back. They had done the right thing and found the perfect partners for Latia and Romonus. Just as no one expected their dance to become even better, their pace seemingly doubled. They began to move through the dance floor in a flurry of footsteps and dance moves. Rias, who was still with her mother, covered her mouth as she got a little teary-eyed. So beautiful. Then Alana smiled as he hugged her daughter tight. Just then Zeoticus walked up to her and extended his hand. Love of my life, dance with me. Zeoticus, it's been so long. I still remember the way you dazzled when we met. Rias pushed her mother to go with her father, as this was why she wanted to find who she loved. Then Alana had told her how her father stole her heart, and she wanted to see it. With that push, Alana took her husband's hand and joined him on the dance floor once again. Serzex then turned to Graphia, who was still holding Milikas. Graphia, my dear. She smiled as she handed Milikas to Rahvdall. Hold him. Sure. Once they were dancing, 3 pairs of Gremory were locked in their dances. Rias was sad she had no one, but she would rather die than dance with Riser. She looked as Latia leapt into the air and Romonus carried her with grace. They continued their lightning pace, but the devils like them, it was a regular place. When the dance finally ended, they both looked each other in the eyes. That simple gesture meant too much to them. When every dance ended, Zeoticus turned to address the guests. Thank you for coming, everyone. Let's all wish the new matchings prosperity. Following his statement, a cacophony of applause filled the ballroom. Romonus and Latia gently rested their head against each other as they enjoyed the other's company. This was the first time they had met, and it had gone great. The celebration ended up lasting a few more hours and ended when all of the food and drink were done. Once the guests began to leave, Romonus and Latia exchanged contact information as phones were a thing in the underworld. Riser tried to do the same, but Rias shot him down and refused to even talk to him. That angered the Phoenix heir, but his brother Rahvdall pulled him along with the rest of the family. But once the mansion was truly empty, Romonus walked toward Rias. Tomorrow at 7 a.m. Wake up on time, okay? Rias nodded. I won't slack off anymore. Count on it. I do. With that goodbye, Romonus returned to his room and opened it with his key. Once he was inside, he brought out the hair of Diodora. As he looked at the blue hair of one of the shitty's characters, he thought about it. I better call my teacher. He will hear me out. McGregor Mathers was not a noble individual and was open to anything in exchange for magical research. He had learned many black magic spells from his teacher, and this was one of his creations. He called it the Call of the Rahvdall, and if it worked, the heart of Diodora would be in his hands. Of course, if it went wrong, he could end up with his heart out of his chest, so caution was advised. That was why he had to be cautious, as rushing into rituals was dangerous. For now, he pulled out his phone and called up his teacher. The phone did not ring for long before it was picked up. Romonus. What do you need? Master, I wanted your aid in a less than noble experiment. Explain. Of course. I made a spell of my own as I want to use the ritual of purification. I have picked out a heart, but its owner still has it. Who is it? Diodora Astaroth. 4. It's a long story. I have time. He sighed. Fine. What do you know about the future? Not as much as I should. Can you see the future? Maybe. Stay in your room. I will be there, and you better convince me of this yourself. Got it? Yes. Romonus backed away as the teleport circle of his magic teacher opened up. From it emerged McGregor Mathers, the best bishop of the underworld. Explain to me what you know? All right then. Buckle up. Chapter 8. Calling on the Rahvdall, edited. Samuel Liddell McGregor Mathers, one of the greatest human mages to have ever been born, even before becoming a devil. It took Serzex both of his bishop pieces to reincarnate Mathers. When he was human, he founded the magician organization The Golden Dawn, which he was still in contact with. The man had lived for more than 150 years and had become even stronger throughout that time, when time held no meaning for him as a devil. He wore a crimson robe with a distinguished design, and a permanent aura of magical suppression radiated from him. With a wave of his hand, Romonus' room was covered in multiple wards so no one would hear their conversation. All right, Romonus, explain why you want to kill Diodora. Even if you don't convince me, your secret will be safe. Romonus sat down in his favorite chair as he explained. Master, it goes like this. I can't see the future. I receive glimpses of prophecy in my dreams. I have no control over them, but from what I have seen, they can be changed. McGregor pondered on what he had been told. Interesting. Got some examples? Ramana nodded. Yes. Rias was involved in many events I keep picturing, which all take place 7 years from now. I already knew of her engagement to Riser, but oddly enough, the version of events I keep seeing don't involve me. Like I don't exist. If I did not exist, Rias would continue to waste her time and end up having to challenge Riser to a raiding game, which she would be expected to lose. But my existence caused this to change. McGregor's closed his eyes as he pondered on the words he heard. Very curious. So, in these visions, you don't exist. McGregor extended his hand out and a grimoire appeared in his hands. He flipped through it at incredible speeds before he put it away. I get what you mean. So, Diodora causes trouble in the future? Yes. Diodora betrays Devil Society by joining a group called the Cows Brigade led by Rahvdall. Rizavim will manipulate Ophis, the dragon god of infinity, as you know she is rather simple. Shalba Beelzebub, Cruisery Asmodeus, and Kateria Leviathan will all join this group. McGregor sighed. And you didn't think it smart to say so beforehand? We can prevent this by leading an assault beforehand. Romonus shook his head. I plan to take the hearts of Shalba, Cruisery, and Kateria, and if we move beforehand I will miss my chance. I wanted at least 5 more years of training before I was going to bring this up. I only told you because I know you well, Master. McGregor began to laugh. You greedy little guy. You want the bloodlines of the original Satans. This sounds fun and chaotic. But chaos is fun and so much can be learned. Your secret is safe with me. Let's kill his Diodora. Show me your spell. Romonus smiled as he pulled out a journal from his spatial ring and flipped it open to the page of the spell. He handed the journal over to his mentor, who began to flip through the spell. Damn. You want to call on the harvest of all things wicked. As for the spell itself, it is a mix of voodoo, black magic, white magic, summoning magic, Norse, fairy, and demonic magic. You have done a good job with this, but let me just do this. You do not want to get caught by a Juka, but the Harvesta is unique. Creepy fellow. From thin air, McGregor brought out a pen and began to change up the ritual lines, added some of his expertise, and added in ways to hide who cast the spell. It took him all of a minute to be finished with the edits. Here you are. Now, you will be much safer and harder to track. Consider it a gift. When Romonus saw the improved ritual, he smiled. Will I ever compare to you, Master? McGregor laughed as he ruffled Romonus' hair. If you give up the path of the knight and rook, and focus exclusively on magic, of course. If you decide to keep on the current path you have of focusing on all three, then no. Romonus did not believe that. I have thousands of years, Master. I will become the first devil to ascend to godhood, as even my brother has not achieved that. How can I allow myself to follow a single path when 3 are laid out in front of me? McGregor stared at Romonus for a few moments before he broke out laughing. He keeled over and held his stomach as he continued to laugh. Ha 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 ha. You certainly have a goal, kid. C kid. Come on. Let's do some dark magic and get you a heart. Fresh, of course. Romonus got up and looked over the ritual circle that his teacher edited for him. Once he memorized it, he pulled out his sword from his spatial ring. It was not his demon sword, but the one he had forged years ago, as he did not want to use it yet. He pulled the sword from its sheath and cut open his wrist. McGregor simply watched as he turned his wrist over and began to spill his blood onto the ground. Romonus focused on his demonic energy as the blood spilling on the ground began to move into lines, symbols, and shapes of multiple magic systems. His teacher observed his work as he checked for mistakes, but Romonus had been learning under the mage for 6 years. He would not make a mistake like that, as he knew the risks associated with magic. When he was finished, he felt he had lost over half of his blood, but in the ground, a large 6-foot by 6-foot blood ritual circle had been formed. It was the most intricate thing he had formed, and he was already feeling lightheaded. He staggered over to his alchemy table and grabbed a red potion, which he chugged down. McGregor did not offer him any hold and just watched as Romonus closed his eyes and began to circulate his demonic energy in his body. In a few moments, his pale face recovered its color and his lightheadedness went away. When he opened his eyes, they were glowing bright purple as his potion flowed through his system. What was that? A blood potion. Made for speeding up the recovery of blood. I made it from blood shrooms, grasping devil vine flowers, and crimson moss. Does it have any downsides? He nodded. Drinking it when you don't need it will make you die of polycythemia vera. Blood thickening, but when needed it can be a lifesaver. Romonus kneeled, opened up the cabinet on which his alchemy table was, and pulled out a green potion which he drank. He once again focused on the potion and used the healing herbs to heal himself. Once he was done, he continued to circulate his demonic energy to make sure nothing was wrong. This whole thing took him about 10 minutes, but his teacher did not rush him. When he felt he was ready, he stood up and walked over to the magic circle. All right, what do you have to mark Diodora as the target? Romonus pulled out the blue hair he had taken from Diodora and showed it to his teacher. McGregor nodded, as that would work excellently. We can begin. Give me a few moments. McGregor from his spatial ring pulled out 9 stones of pure refined souls. He placed them in each circle in the 9 corners. In the center, they placed Diodora's hair. He turned to Romonus with a serious expression. You do it. This is your spell, I just fixed it for you. Latin will work just fine. Just remember, the Harvesta can reject your offer, so be careful. Romonus nodded as he placed his sword back in its sheath before he kneeled in front of the magic circle. He placed a hand in front of it before he began to send his demonic energy into the circle. He took a deep breath as he began to chant, and the circle began to glow a bloody red as he began to chant in Latin. Invoco maledictionem harvestri. Ut precium sanguinis salvo, harvestrum voco pro cruento commercio. Ut invoco cruentum opus, metet cruentum premium pro reproborum cor. I call upon the harvester's curse. As I pay the price of blood, I call on the harvester for a bloody exchange. As I call on his bloody work, he shall reap his bloody reward for the heart of the damned. He repeated the chant 9 times, and each time each soul stone burst apart and flowed into the center surrounding the hair that belonged to Diodora. McGregor opened his journal and began to note down what he needed to improve, but nothing would go wrong with him here. With each repetition, the more demonic energy he was losing, but when he finished the 9th chant, a huge amount of soul and demonic energy surged around the blue hair. Romonus backed away as the mana and demonic energy began to rise into the air as they consolidated into a figure. A gaunt-hooded figure formed in the magic circle. The Rahvdall was a magical entity formed and summoned from the spirit realm, but some believed him to be the Grim Reaper. Romonus did not know if that was true or false, but McGregor knew more. He just wouldn't tell him. Image here. The Rahvdall looked down at Romonus, who kneeled with an extended open palm. The figure stared at Romonus for a few moments before he nodded, turned around, and vanished. McGregor grinned. He accepted. Romonus stood up and looked over to his teacher. You mean to tell me he could refuse? McGregor nodded. Yes. He is whimsical, and it seems he took a liking to you. I once called on him, and he rejected me. I wonder why he listened to. Romonus was now slightly worried. He won't take yours off my life, will he? No. Equivalent exchange. Those 9 souls were the price we paid, and it was enough to manifest him for a time. He will get you your heart. We just have to wait for him to finish. I wouldn't wish the Rahvdall on my worst enemy. Oh wait, I tried. Romonus sat down in his chair and waited for the Rahvdall to do his bloody work. Diodora was currently quite pissed after what Romonus told him. He had worked hard to keep his fetish secret, as if his family found out what he was doing, they would punish him. If the church or heaven found out, they would hunt him down and start another war. Currently, he was venting his rage on his queen. He was in no way being gentle, as the former holy maiden was forced onto the bed with a pained look on her face. *CKNG bastard. Who does he think he is? Master, P-. Shut up. Diodora reached down and wrapped his arms around her throat. Who told you to talk? You don't talk. This mouth is to suck me off and nothing more. Got that? She did not say anything as her eyes began to roll back into her skull, but as Diodora was about to finish inside her, he felt a cold chill. What? His luxurious room went from his private abode to a cold, terrifying place. He got off his queen as he waved his hand to form clothes around himself. What is happening? He turned to his peerage, which he had been abusing since he got back. You. Wake up. Protect me. Sadly, they were out as he had knocked them out from the abuse. Just as Diodora raised his arm to punish them, he suddenly felt something new. He looked at where his hand would be and instead found a stump. A quickly rotting stump, which made him panic. Hey, my hand. He fell to the ground as he rolled around in pain. When he looked up, he noticed the Rahvdall looking down on him. In his hands, he held a black scythe at the end of a chain, and on the floor was his rotting hand. You bastard. Diodora raised his remaining hand and formed a magic circle from which he was going to attack, but the Rahvdall swung again and cleaved his remaining hand. Adu. My hands. No. Stay away. He backed away before raising his rotting arms and forming a massive green barrier as he called upon his barrier magic. He began to madly laugh as he continued to bleed rotting blood. Even a ultimate class devil will take time to break through this. I am Diodora, related to the great Beelzebub. You will die. Unimpressed, the Rahvdall floated toward the barrier before he lightly tapped it with a bony finger. Instantly, the green barrier collapsed under the surge of necrotic energy. What? The Rahvdall floated toward him and leaned in close. When Diodora looked into the hood, he saw his own rotting face. He gasped as a dark bony hand was shoved into his chest. He reached up with his stumps to grab the Rahvdall's arm, but he was undisturbed. Taking a sick joy in this, he slowly pulled out the still beating heart of Diodora. Unlike everything else, the organ did not rot in his hold. The Rahvdall looked at the heart in his hand before he burst into darkness. When his peerage would wake up, they would only find a pile of ash confirmed to be Diodora. In the morning, the whole Astaroth clan would be shocked at the death of their heir. Ajuka would be informed, who would begin to search for answers. Ending Diodora early had a great domino effect on fate, which Romonus boss reveled in. Romonus kept his word to cause as much of a mess as he could, and he was delivering.